In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, nor a dry, bare, sandy hole, but a comfortable hole, and that meant a great deal to Bilbo Baggins of Bag End, Hobbiton, in the Shire. His hole had panelled walls and tiled floors, round doors and round windows, deep armchairs and a pantry stocked with enough cold chicken, pickle, bread, butter, cake, and seed cake to satisfy even the most unexpected of guests. And Bilbo, it must be said, did not enjoy unexpected guests. He enjoyed his armchair. He enjoyed his pipe. He enjoyed his second breakfast and his 11s and his 4 o'clock tea. He enjoyed, above all else, the quiet certainty that tomorrow would be exactly like today. He was, by any reckoning, the most thoroughly comfortable and thoroughly unadventurous hobbit in the Shire, which is saying something, because hobbits as a species had refined the art of staying put to a level approaching the philosophical. Bilbo was 50 years old, round-bellied and light-footed, with large hairy feet and quick bright eyes, and he had not done a single remarkable thing in his entire life, and he was perfectly content about this, and if you had told him that morning, the morning of which we speak, that by the following spring he would have faced a dragon, solved a riddle in the dark with a creature made of shadow and malice, walked through the halls of a goblin king, and helped reclaim an ancient dwarven kingdom from the most fearsome dragon in the world, he would have laughed and offered you a biscuit. But then Gandalf arrived. Gandalf the Grey was a wizard of great age and greater mystery, with a tall pointed hat, a staff of gnarled wood, a grey cloak, and a habit of sending people on adventures without giving them sufficient time to pack. He appeared at Bilbo's round green door on a bright April morning and stood there with his sharp blue eyes and his long white eyebrows and said that he was looking for someone to share in an adventure, and that Bilbo looked precisely the right sort of fellow for it. Bilbo said, "Good morning," in the way that is meant to mean good morning and nothing else whatsoever, and also please go away. Gandalf was unmoved. The next evening, 13 dwarfs arrived at Bilbo's door in rapid succession, ate virtually everything in his pantry, and held a council in his sitting room around a map of a mountain. Their leader was Thorin Oakenshield, a dwarf of great dignity and greater pride, with a dark blue hood, a silver tassel, a magnificent long beard, and the bearing of a king who had never quite forgiven the world for the kingdom it had taken from him. The dwarfs had once ruled the great mountain kingdom of Erebor beneath the lonely mountain, mining gold and forging marvels, until the dragon Smaug had come in fire and ruin and driven them out and taken everything. Thorin wanted it back. He wanted the Arkenstone, the great heart gem of his people, and he wanted the halls of his fathers, and he wanted a burglar to slip inside the dragon's lair unseen while the dwarfs, who were not small and not quiet and tended to clank, waited outside. Gandalf had nominated Bilbo. "I am not a burglar," Bilbo said, looking around at 13 dwarfs who were helping themselves to his last seed cake. "Not yet," said Gandalf pleasantly. That night, after the dwarfs and the wizard had gone to sleep in various undignified positions across his floor, Bilbo sat alone by the dying fire and felt something stir in him that he had no name for. His mother's family, the Tooks, had been adventurous sorts, and there was something in his blood that had never quite been extinguished, only buried under layers of routine and comfort. He looked at the map of the lonely mountain and felt afraid. And then, beneath the fear, he felt something else, the faint, stubborn spark of wanting to go. He ran out of his door the next morning without his pocket handkerchief, which bothered him considerably, but not enough to go back. The journey was long and frequently terrible and occasionally magnificent. They crossed the wide lands east of the Shire and climbed into the cold, misty mountains, where a sudden summer storm drove them into a cave that turned out to be a goblin tunnel, and the goblins took them prisoner, and everything became very loud and very dangerous very quickly. Gandalf appeared from nowhere and lit the dark with a blinding flash of his staff, and in the chaos that followed, Bilbo fell. Down and down through the dark of the mountain, bouncing against stone, until he landed unconscious on the cold floor of a deep underground lake. He woke alone in complete darkness. His hand, reaching blindly across the floor, found a small, cold ring and slipped it into his pocket without thinking, the way one does with small found things in the dark. Then he heard a sound, a wet, soft, muttering sound, and saw 2 pale lights moving across the water toward him. They were eyes. They belonged to a creature called Gollum, thin and grey and ancient, with enormous lamp-like eyes and long pale fingers, who had lived alone in the dark so long that he spoke to himself in 2 voices and referred to himself as we and precious. Gollum was dangerous. He ate fish and, when he could catch them, goblins. He did not intend to let Bilbo go. But Bilbo, to his own considerable surprise, did not run. He sat down on a wet rock and said, with a steadiness that amazed him even as he heard it in his own voice, "Let's have a game of riddles." The riddle game was ancient and honorable. Even Gollum was bound by its rules. They traded riddles in the dark, Bilbo drawing on every scrap of wit and lore and half-remembered verse he possessed, and the stakes were this: if Bilbo won, Gollum would show him the way out. If Bilbo lost, Gollum would eat him. In the end, Bilbo won, by accident, really, asking "What have I got in my pocket?" as a genuine question rather than a proper riddle. But he won. And when Gollum, enraged and suspicious, dove for his island to fetch something to help him, and came back howling because the ring was gone, the ring that made its wearer invisible, the ring that was Gollum's most precious possession, Bilbo had it on his finger and was already running. He ran invisible through the goblin tunnels, leaped over Gollum in the dark, and squeezed, barely, agonizingly, losing several buttons, through the crack in the rock and out into the open air and the smell of pine trees and the mountain wind. He had escaped, not because he was strong, or because Gandalf saved him, or because the ring did everything for him. He had escaped because he had sat down in the dark and thought, and held himself together with both hands, and chosen to be clever when everything in him screamed to panic. He was different, after the mountain. Not loudly, not in ways the dwarfs immediately noticed. But something had shifted in the deep ballast of him. He was still afraid. He was afraid frequently and thoroughly, and made no effort to pretend otherwise. But he had learned that being afraid and being brave were not opposites. They were the same moment, experienced differently. The adventures continued. They were rescued by the Lord of the Eagles, who carried them through the sky to the eyries of the mountains while the forest burned below. They rested in the house of Birn, a great skin-changer who was a bear at night and a man by day and whose honeycakes were the finest thing Bilbo had ever tasted. They walked through Mirkwood, dark, web-choked, damp, full of spiders the size of ponies and an enchanted river that stole memory and sleep. And it was Bilbo who found his friends hanging cocooned in spider silk and cut them free, one by one, fighting the spiders alone with his short elvish blade Sting, which glowed blue in the presence of orcs and which he had named himself in the moment of first using it, because naming a thing makes it real and real things have power. When the dwarfs were captured by the woodland elves and imprisoned in the halls of the elven king Thranduil, deep underground, comfortable enough as prisons went, but still very much prison, it was Bilbo, invisible with the ring, who crept through the halls for weeks learning their layout, befriending the chief guard's love of strong wine, and ultimately organized the escape of 13 dwarfs in empty wine barrels floated down the river to Lake Town. It was undignified and cold and the dwarfs complained bitterly. They all made it out. Thorin never quite said thank you. But he looked at Bilbo differently after that. They all did. And then, the lonely mountain, black and vast against the grey sky, its peak trailing a wisp of old smoke. The dwarfs went quiet as they approached it. Even Thorin's proud face changed, became younger, and more fragile, and full of something that was not quite hope and not quite grief but lived somewhere between the two. Bilbo found the hidden door. He was the one who worked out Thorin's riddle map by moonlight on the right day of autumn, watching the last light of the setting sun fall on the secret keyhole that no one had found in 60 years. He opened it. And then he climbed down alone into the dragon's den. The treasure hall of Erebor was beyond imagining. Mountains of gold coins and gem-crusted armor and ancient crowns and weapons stretched into the dark in every direction, glittering in the faint red light that came from the dragon himself. Smaug, vast as a cathedral, red gold as autumn leaves, coiled on his treasure hoard in a sleep that was simultaneously the deepest slumber and the lightest vigilance. One enormous eye opened as Bilbo crept forward on invisible feet. "Well, thief," said Smaug. His voice was like underground rivers of fire. "I smell you, though I cannot see you. Come, let us have a conversation." Any sensible creature would have run. Bilbo stayed. He talked to the dragon, carefully, obliquely, with riddles and flattery and careful half-truths, and in doing so noticed the one bare patch on Smaug's underbelly where the gems had never quite covered him, the one place where a well-aimed arrow might do what 1,000 swords could not. He escaped without the dragon catching him. He told his friends what he had learned. It cost him. Smaug, furious at having been deceived, flew to Lake Town and burned it. People died. It was a weight Bilbo carried in his chest from that day forward. The understanding that courage has consequences, that even the right thing can leave scorch marks. But Smaug was felled over the burning lake by an arrow from Bard the bowman, aimed at the bare patch Bilbo had found, and the dragon fell like a burning star into the cold water and was gone forever. The mountain was free. And almost immediately, everything became complicated in a different way. Thorin, standing in the reclaimed halls of his fathers with the treasure of generations glittering around him, was changing. The dragon sickness, the madness that gold works in those who desire it too deeply, was taking hold. His eyes became hard and bright and distant. He refused to honor the promises made to the men of Laketown who had helped them. He barricaded the mountain and called for war. The dwarf who had been stern but fair became suspicious of everyone, especially Bilbo, who he accused of disloyalty when Bilbo tried to reason with him. And Bilbo, who had faced goblins and spiders and a dragon, found that this was the hardest thing of all. He went alone, in the night, to the camp of Bard and the Elven King, and gave them the Arkenstone, the greatest treasure in the mountain, the one thing that might force Thorin to negotiate, the one thing Bilbo had found and kept secretly. It was a profound act of courage and a profound act of betrayal at the same time, and Bilbo knew both things simultaneously and chose the one that might prevent a war. When Thorin found out, he was cold with fury. He would have thrown Bilbo from the mountain ramparts if Gandalf had not appeared. Bilbo bore Thorin's anger quietly and without excuse. He was small, and afraid, and shaking, and he did not take back what he had done. The battle of 5 armies came anyway, as battles will. Dwarfs, men, and elves fought goblins and wargs on the slopes of the lonely mountain until the eagles arrived and the tide turned, and Thorin himself rode out, great, terrible, shining, and fought like the king he was, and was mortally wounded in the fighting. Bilbo was struck on the head by a stone and woke to find the battle over and the field full of the aftermath of violence, the quiet, grey, particular silence that follows fighting. He found Thorin lying on a makeshift bed, the life going out of him slowly, his face smoothed of the madness at last and looking, again, like the dignified and proud and lonely dwarf who had eaten all Bilbo's seed cake and offered him a seat in an adventure he had never asked for. "Farewell, good thief," Thorin said. "I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers, until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all gold and silver, and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship from you." Bilbo could not speak. He wept, and was not ashamed of it. "If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold," Thorin said very quietly, "it would be a merrier world." He died as the autumn light fell golden on the mountain. Bilbo walked home. It took a long time. He arrived back in Hobbiton to find his belongings being auctioned off in his front garden, as everyone had presumed him dead. He bought most of them back, which was expensive and irritating. His neighbors looked at him strangely. His reputation for respectability was never quite the same. He did not mind. He sat by his fire with his pipe and his tea and the small elvish blade hanging above the mantelpiece, and he thought about what he had learned. He had gone into the world small and soft and certain of his own limitations. He had come home having helped slay a dragon, escaped a goblin kingdom, solved riddles in the dark, and chosen friendship over gold when it cost him something real. He had not become a different hobbit. He was still Bilbo Baggins of Bag End, still fond of his armchair and his pipe and his pantry. But he knew now that the courage had always been in him, waiting, patient, like a seed in winter ground, needing only the cold and the dark and the right moment of difficulty to push through the surface and grow toward whatever light was available. He wrote it all down, eventually, in a book he called There and Back Again. Not because the adventure had been easy or clean or without cost, but because it had been real, and because truth told honestly, even the difficult parts, especially the difficult parts, is a kind of courage too. Outside his round window, the Shire went on being exactly itself, green and warm and full of second breakfasts. But Bilbo Baggins looked at it differently now. Not with the complacent certainty of someone who would never leave, but with the deep, grateful love of someone who had been to the edge of the world and chosen to come home. That, perhaps, was the greatest courage of all.